welcome back, maybe, to my channel. My name is August, and here I am now with my most ambitious and longest video idea ever. So strap in, or if you're like me, actually just watch this over the course of several days while you make food. This video is about Dan and Phil. It's about parasocial relationships. It's about the experience of being in the audience of extremely famous YouTubers. It's about neurodivergence. Did I already say that? It's about fantasy and hope and just how weird the world that we live in is. So if any of that is interesting to you, then stick around and let's jump in. Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna start with my personal history with Dan and Phil. I just want to give you guys some context of like where I'm coming from. So I was definitely like into YouTubers, like specifically like British boy YouTubers mostly, when I was in like early high school, maybe late middle school as well. But my favorite was Charlie Is So Cool. Like, shout out to her, she's trans like me. I peripherally was also aware of Dan and Phil at the time. I think I watched a few of their videos. I think I liked Dan more because I thought he was cute, and I was actually really similar to Phil, but I didn't realize that, and I think I didn't like him because I didn't like myself at that age, which is sad, but anyway. I knew about Dan and Phil, and I watched them a little bit, but I wasn't in the fandom. And I knew about the shipping, and I knew that it was really wild in there. That was enough information for me at the time to know that I should just steer clear of that, and honestly, like, I was right. So I wasn't in the fandom in like the 2010s. What really kicked it off for me was basically I'm Gay, which is Dan Howell's coming out video. It was posted in 2019. I actually found out about it through another YouTuber who made a video about why it was so good. So shout out to Ashton Daniel. I watched his video about Daniel Howell's coming out video, and then I was like, damn, I should watch that. And then I did, and then basically things just got crazy from there. Like, it was like a snowball. I just kept rolling. This video is about Dan and Phil, and not about Dan. So I do want to emphasize that, like, the point of Basically I'm Gay is not what I'm about to talk about. But my notes about Basically I'm Gay say it was like the end of the world, but also the beginning of the world. Imagine that you think Dan and Phil are probably gay, but you don't want to speculate because it seems like a violation of their privacy. And they clearly don't want people to pry. And then Dan Howell says,
"This is when, through the magic of the internet, I met Phil. And obviously we were more than friends, but it was more than just romantic. This is someone that genuinely liked me. I trusted them, and for the first time since I was a tiny child, I actually felt safe. And the relationship we formed at that point was something that I needed in my life. We are real best friends, companions through life, like actual soulmates. Not that souls are a real thing that exists. It's so lucky to just find someone you can be that compatible with, and especially to anyone that has experienced the kind of self-hatred that I've dealt with. One person accepting you can make all the difference."
Guys, if you haven't seen Basically I'm Gay, it's like the only coming out video you need to watch. But this video is about being a fan of Dan and Phil, and so what I learned from that section in terms of Dan and Phil is obviously we were more than friends. And obviously we were more than friends, but it wasn't just romantic. So this kind of blew my mind. I think I never thought that I would hear Dan or Phil say that they were obviously more than friends. Because the world, as I understood it, would not allow for us to know this kind of thing. Because it would be, I don't know, too dangerous, too scary to say. Like, I don't know. As a casual Dan and Phil viewer, I already knew that they were gay because I'm gay. And I could tell. But I wasn't about to go say anything about it. I was trying not to think about it because they didn't want me to know. And then they told me, and then I was like, oh shit. And so I watched so much Dan and Phil. I just hyper fixated on Dan and Phil for the first time in my life. I guess I was among the graduating class of It Hits Different. Because personally, and this is something I'm also going to get into later, I tend to be drawn towards media that focuses on a relationship or a dynamic between two people. And two YouTubers that are best friends and roommates and have amazing chemistry is like crack to someone like me and to a bunch of fucking people as well. So I went deep into a Dan and Phil hole and I just binged Dan and Phil games and had like maybe a month or two where I was just really hyper fixated on that, but I was also like hiding it. Like I didn't want people to know this about me because I was like embarrassed. I didn't want people to think that I was like one of those people that like I don't know. I feel like there was like, there maybe even still is among people on the internet who know who Dan and Phil are but are not part of the fandom. Like, there's a stigma, I think, where it's like those people are weird, those people are like obsessive or like annoying. And I didn't want to be seen that way and I didn't want to see myself that way. But I also had this experience around that same time that really changed like how, like, it was like the first domino in sort of a major shift in my thinking, which was that I did, can I say this on YouTube? I did shrooms and I was like drawing and like doing a little bit of writing. And one thing that I wrote was, it's okay to zoom in. And it took me a really long time to sort of fully put together what I meant by that. But at the time, I think I was aware that I stopped myself from getting obsessed with things. Like, I think in retrospect that it was one way that I was masking my autism, like from myself, was that I was stopping myself from going into these holes, getting like absorbed, obsessed, immersed in my interests, and even just admitting to myself what my interests were that I could get that into. I also got headphones around this time for the first time, and that was another way in which I was like letting myself zoom in, like kind of letting myself go into like the world of the internet in like a more immersive way than I ever had before. Because I always sort of thought of the internet as like, I don't know, like not real or not like as important as like tangible things or natural things, like nature. Like I was really into nature as a kid and I thought like that was like the good, pure version of me and that I would be like corrupted by this like bad like internet if I let it get to me in that way. And then I had this sort of point where I was like, I think it's okay. I think it's like I'm allowed to just like fully go in, like zoom all the way in to my interests without keeping sort of one foot out the door. It was the very beginning of me letting go a little bit of the shame that I felt about wanting to dive into stuff like that. So I had that intense hyperfixation about Dan and Phil, and then I had like a year of sort of not really engaging with Dan and Phil stuff. But within that time, they came back from the dead on the gaming channel. And I watched that video and I watched some of the new gaming channel videos, but I still didn't really get into them in that way, if that makes sense to you. But in January 2024, I got COVID. I was stuck in my room. I was testing positive for over 2 weeks. Like, I was like isolating, not able to work for like a long ass time. It just lasted forever. Like I said, that was in 2024 after a lot of people think COVID was over. So obviously COVID was not over and it's still not over in case you need to hear that. But when I was trapped in my room, I decided to start from the beginning and watch Dan and Phil play The Sims. I have never played The Sims. I've never played really any video games. Literally the only video game I played growing up was I played Jack and Dexter in my friend's basement like twice. That was pretty fun. I guess. But yeah, I never got into video games. So I am one of those Dan and Phil Games viewers that literally like doesn't understand video games and doesn't care. I just care about Dan and Phil. So yeah, trapped in my room, watching The Sims. Not surprising at all that I fell deep into a Dan and Phil hyperfixation hole in January 2024, and that lasted maybe like a month or so. So then I recovered from COVID, whole year happened, January 2025, this January. I was going through some stuff in my personal life that I'm not going to talk about on YouTube, but basically I didn't have a lot of time to be in touch with my emotions and do things that I wanted to do, and I ended up sort of as a coping mechanism turning to different interests that I had to like distract me so that I could get through these like difficult periods of time. Anybody relate? First, I was like reading like a shit ton of Wolfstar fan fiction, and then I don't know why exactly, but it shifted back to Dan and Phil. There's a point in, I'll just call it neurodivergent obsession, where you're so deep in there that something shifts and it's like you feel like you're like completely immersed in whatever you're watching, reading, looking at, whatever. To me, it feels almost like going into the video. And I felt like I would never get tired of watching these videos. And honestly, I still haven't, so maybe I won't. But there's a moment where you're cooked. So for me, I was watching What Dan and Phil Text Each Other 5 at my friend's apartment because I was taking care of her cat. And I had this moment where I had to pause the video because I was freaking out. I was freaked out that I was sat on my own and experiencing such a depth of emotion from watching this video that was not just because I thought it was good content, but more because I felt an attachment to the people that were making the content. This is what they call a parasocial relationship. Actually, I'm gonna look up the definition of a parasocial relationship because I don't think I have before. Parasocial relationships are one-sided relationships where one person extends emotional energy, interest, and time, and the other party, the persona, is completely unaware of the other's existence. Now that's interesting. That's interesting to me because that idea of it being one-sided, it's true. It's interesting to me though because most of what I know about parasocial relationships actually comes from Dan and Phil. Because they, or more specifically Dan, talks so much about parasocial relationships. It's like clearly something that he's like really thought about like a lot, which I really appreciate because it's a really weird thing. It can't just be boiled down to a one-sided sort of not real relationship because like what is a real relationship? Like what makes it real? And it is one-sided, but it's kind of like one-sided on both sides, if that makes sense. I'm going to talk about Dan and Phil because that's my area of expertise. Yes, they are unaware of me as an individual, but they are aware of their audience as a collective. And I just want to point out that like it is one-sided, but there is the icon's perspective, the YouTuber's perspective of the parasocial relationship. It's one-sided on both sides. Hi, I'm editing. Sorry for the air conditioner sound, but my friend pointed out that it's impossible for something to be one-sided on both sides because that means that there are literally two or more sides. So I guess what I was trying to say was that both sides are sort of separated from each other and cannot communicate directly. But yes, technically there are two sides, so it can't be one-sided. It's one-sided from the perspective of the audience who are aware of Dan and Phil as individuals. And then it's like also one-sided from Dan and Phil's perspective. They're very aware of the audience, but they're not able to see people on an individual level. They see people as like this mass. It's actually so weird to think about. The audience from the perspective of a content creator is such a weird thing. It's like an amorphous blob or like some kind of like monster that they can interact with, but they can never really see all of it at the same time. It's this invisible beast that YouTubers interact with, but never directly. There's always some kind of divide in between the audience and the YouTuber. And there's not only like a physical divide that they're in different places, but there's also a temporal divide. Like, let's talk about me and you. Like, I'm making this video now. I'm not gonna post it now, but you, the viewer, are watching this anytime from literally the second that I post it until the end of the internet or the end of YouTube or the end of time, or like however you want to think about that. Like, there is potentially so much time in between me now and you watching this video. There's just so many layers of divide. And I think that's like so interesting and creates such a unique dynamic in a relationship, in a parasocial relationship. And it can be really freaky to be on either side of that parasocial relationship. I'm going to talk for a bit more about the audience's perspective, my perspective as an individual that's part of this amorphous blob that is the audience. But yeah, that audience, that like image really stuck with me, that image that I made up really stuck with me because it helped me to like conceptualize how hard it is to conceptualize the audience for like a YouTuber. Like, they can never see the entirety of their audience at once. That's like impossible. They can see it represented in numbers and like statistics, but they can never look at their audience the same way that I can look at another person in real life. And then from the audience's perspective, you can be fully alone, having this experience that is like really intense based on not only the emotions you're getting from watching something, but like the emotions you're getting from feeling that relationship, that one-sided relationship with a content creator. You can feel like you know them really well. You can notice their facial expressions, their mannerisms, things that they do that like you wouldn't know unless you like knew them really well, which is like kind of freaky. The example that's coming to mind, it's always my like go-to example of this, is like knowing that in Dan and Phil games, when they play games that have like any element of stress, if Phil is stressed, he'll be like, geese, geese. I don't know what to do with that information. I just know that he does that because of my parasocial relationship with him. And it can lead to a lot of like really confusing emotions. Like, you can feel really good because this thing that's in your life is giving you happiness or joy that you can't access in another way at that time. Like, that's sort of where I was at a few months ago when I was going through the rough time that I mentioned. It can be really nice to be able to rely on just like, if I watch this, it'll make me feel good. And it can get extreme. And like, I'm not saying that to like make me or anyone else feel ashamed, but it can be like an addiction. It can be an addiction, like a dopamine addiction, which is just really scary to really like come face to face with. And that's what happened for me that moment that I was describing in my friend's apartment watching Dan and Phil alone. I just had this realization that I was like, I'm feeling all of these extreme things. I'm feeling like I know these people. I'm feeling like so much like actual joy from watching these people that literally like I'm nothing to them. I'm not nothing to them, but I'm part of this huge amorphous like blob of their audience that they can never fully see. And I'm like one like grain of sand in that. Like, and that's just like really weird to think about. And I know that's not like the only way to conceptualize yourself in the audience, but that's like what has made the most sense to me. I just remember feeling so confused and like guilty. Like, should I feel ashamed about this? Should I feel conflicted? Or like, should I like never watch them again and try to like cleanse my mind of them? And I don't know. Like, I was feeling this shame and I was feeling like I was a creep for like knowing so much and caring so much about these people that I'm never gonna meet. But then at the same time, like that kind of hyperfixation or like special interest can really bring you so much joy and like so much fulfillment. And that's like really confusing. Like, I don't know what to do with the fact that like it's really scary to feel like you're maybe like addicted to this thing that like has all of this complicatedness around it, but then also be like, this is like a real thing in my life that's like bringing me a lot of like joy and like comfort. And it can be freaky. And it got to the point where it started to kind of scare me. Like, there were times in my life that I was seeing Dan and Phil more often than I was seeing my real life friends. And that's just like, that just makes me feel weird. I don't really know. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people that can relate to that. But like I mentioned, something that's weird about it is that in a way, we're going through it together. Like the audience and Dan and Phil are going through it together. Obviously, also not together because that's part of the nature of parasocial relationships. And I just want to say there's always going to be something weird about parasocial relationships. I think humans are supposed to see each other, be able to look each other in the eyes, be able to touch each other, and be interacting with each other in real time. And so there's, I think, always going to be something, I don't know, like weird and off about parasocial relationships, or like at least complicated. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. And this is something that I think is important. I think people have this urge to quantify things and like say definitively whether they are good or bad or like right or wrong. But you can't do that. You can't definitively have like an answer that everyone is going to like universally agree is good or bad or right or wrong. Things just are, and like regardless of whether parasocial relationships are like bad or good, they exist. They're part of the world that we live in, and I think that like it's much more productive to accept that and then go from there.
Yep, that's the thing now. That's the world that we're living in.
Something that I've wondered about is, does the audience owe anything to the content creators? Do the content creators owe anything to the audience? Part of what's almost kind of cool about parasocial relationships is that on both sides, people are just doing whatever they want. Like me, for example, on this YouTube channel, I posted like a bunch of videos in January and February, and then took like a long break, and I didn't post for a while, and like I just didn't, and I was just doing that because this is my channel, like, and I can do whatever I want. And that's something that's, I think, actually really cool about parasocial relationships. To use Dan and Phil as an example again, they can post about whatever they want, and people can watch it if they want to and not watch it if they don't want to. Like, they just posted like a 2.5 hour long Poppy Playtime video. I'm like halfway through it, don't really get what's going on. I don't have to finish it if I don't want to. I don't have to do anything. I probably will finish it because I love Dan and Phil, okay? But it's gonna take me a long time. But like, I don't have to finish it. I just want to do that for me, like not for them. I don't owe them anything. But at the same time, like there is this feeling that we have this responsibility to each other. This is something that Dan has talked about a lot. The feeling that he owes something to his audience. This is something that comes up a lot when they talk about the time period of right around interactive introverts. If you don't know, Interactive Introverts was a stage show that they did. It was their second stage show. And the whole concept was giving the people what they want. And I think that there was a lot that built up to that. I think that, like, maybe more than other YouTubers, Dan and Phil felt a responsibility to connect to their audience and give the audience what they want. Around 2017, 2018, this was like coming to a head for Dan and Phil, where it was starting to become unsustainable, especially for Dan. And the way that they talk about interactive introverts at this point is that Dan needed to take a break from the internet, needed to step away and just like address his mental health and become okay and get to a healthy place within himself, or like it was going to be really bad.
And it was complicated because it wasn't just the burnout. There was also the side of it that, like, me and Phil had one of the biggest, craziest audiences that anyone online had ever had. And for me, it got to a point where I was like, have I felt okay with just the experience of just having this huge fandom of millions of people?
Yeah.
And when you're go, next video, you never like take a
Yeah.
break to go like, what is my life?
What's
How do I
going
feel?
on? Yeah.
And I
'Cause
think I just got to a point where I hadn't decided, I hadn't thought about it. I just knew how I felt, which is that I had to stop.
So they did this tour, Interactive Introverts, where they really tried to do everything they could to make their audience happy, to make them feel like they had gotten everything they wanted from Dan and Phil, which is so interesting to me because, in my opinion, Dan and Phil don't owe anybody anything. They're just doing their thing, and we happen to like it. But it's clear to me that from their perspective, they felt this pressure to be what people wanted them to be. And at the same time, they clearly felt very uncomfortable with the amount of like information and closeness that their audience wanted from them. So they talk about this a lot. I'm going to put in a few clips here of them talking about that time period and their thinking going into that tour, because I think it's so interesting and honestly kind of sad.
Because everything that we did with me and Phil, it was kind of set up to earn the right to quit. And I think for a long time, we felt like we had to do whatever the audience said because
Yeah.
they gave us everything. We were so
Yeah.
grateful for us. Without them, we would have nothing. And so when they were angry at us, they were right. When we'd done something
Sure.
wrong, we had to say sorry for it. And I think it was so hard for us to get out of that mindset of being like, what do we need to do to be okay about it?
So I
Because
think
we did a whole
it was-
tour about it.
Yeah.
In 2018, we did a show called Interactive Introverts, which was the show was giving the people what they want. And the idea was I knew I was going to dip at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
thought we are going to spend a year giving this audience everything they've ever wanted.
like
We're
real
gonna make
fan
every
service
video they've
sort
ever
of-
wanted. Like we're going to go on a tour and we're going to do a whole show that they control. They tell us what to do. They tell us what to say.
Oh, wow.
We're
Okay.
going to do everything that they want so that I can earn the right
To step back. Wow.
to step back.
Fucking hell.
And I think people also feel, on the audience's side, I think that people can feel almost like indebted to them because of all that we get from this side of the parasocial relationship. Like, I've seen people say stuff like, you know, like Dan and Phil saved my life, Dan and Phil got me through law school or whatever the fuck, and they want to give something back to them. I've seen so many videos of people meeting Dan and Phil at a meet and greet and giving them gifts or letters, just things to show them how much they've done for them. And I think these are all ways of coping with this weird relationship that we're in, where we can never fully just look at each other and talk to each other like people. And as like someone that loves YouTube, like this like struggling with this is like a big part of what goes on in my head. But it's comforting at least to know that Dan has thought about it a lot too and has had a lot of similar epiphanies and like freakouts and like all that stuff. And it's also really weird that these parasocial relationships can really like change your brain as it's developing. A friend of mine, we were watching some Lana Del Rey music video and she was like, this video changed my brain chemistry. I definitely have stuff like that I feel like I am who I am partially because I consumed this content, because I watched these YouTube videos. For me, one of the things that I feel like changed my brain chemistry is Ed Stockham's animation videos. If you've never heard of him, he's like one of the best YouTubers of all time, in my opinion. Yeah, his shit like really, I don't know, like catalyzed something as my brain was maturing. That's really weird, right? It's weird that that can happen. Like, we live in a world because of the internet where people that you'll never meet in real life will create something that has such a profound effect on you that it feels like it's literally part of who you are. And they made this thing on their own, not even thinking about you, and they'll never even know that it's like such a big deal to you. Like, that phenomenon is freaky and weird. Once again, there is a Dan and Phil quote about this from like the perspective of the content creator.
Because people just spend all this time watching our content, and
Yeah.
you guys, like, people were literally in lockdown just with their face glued to you. Like, you molded their brains.
People say that a lot.
I know that's
yes.
terrifying. You literally had your hands in their brains, and you were going like this.
So now I want to shift into talking about this from a more neurodivergent perspective.
I'm sorry if you got the Dan and Phil autism instead of like the maths one, the rocket ship one.
We love you, you're valid, but that's rough.
A lot of Dan and Phil's fans are neurodivergent. There's actually been a study about this. I'm going to link this YouTube video in the description, but I watched this YouTube video called Dan and Phil's Influence on Neurodivergent and Queer Individuals. And this person sent out a survey and did a bunch of research about how Dan and Phil affected neurodivergent and queer people, because that makes up a large portion of their audience, and especially a large portion of the audience that is like active in like online fandom spaces like Tumblr. So I want to talk a bit about that specific intersection when it comes to Dan and Phil and YouTube and all that. First of all, I think that the way that I've described hyperfixation or like being fixated on Dan and Phil from my perspective is something that is very neurodivergent. Like, that's a core like neurodivergent experience. I don't know whether to refer to it as a special interest. I think for me, it is. I don't think it has to be, but I think that it is for me. But I'm just still like coming to terms with like using that term for myself. There's an amazing video by Ashton Daniel about special interests in general and like shame and how it really feels to have a special interest. I'm going to link that video in the description. I love to link a ton of videos in the description, so get hyped for that. I think a lot of neurodivergent people experience obsessions in a way that might be really hard for a neurotypical person to understand, where this is something that is consuming so much of their mind and so much of their brain space, and it almost feels embarrassing to like even admit to yourself how much you care or think about this thing. That's how I feel about Dan and Phil. And I think it's how a lot of people on Tumblr feel about Dan and Phil. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that could be true. And the one I want to start with is that whether or not Dan and Phil are neurodivergent themselves, I'm not here to speculate about that. My personal, let's call it headcanon, is that they both are super neurodivergent. But regardless of that, they were making stuff that clearly showed them being weird and being themselves in a really alternative way, a really weird way. They were being weird online. And I think a lot of people saw that and felt like, holy shit, like, you can do that and people like you. You can just act like that. You can act like that. That's how I act. And I think that was really powerful for people to see. It really helped people to like accept that part of themselves, the part of themselves that maybe wants to like be like rawr, or like draw cat whiskers on their face, or like do these weird quirky things, or like maybe they're obsessed with like Dan and Phil are really obsessed with like Muse and like Final Fantasy, and seeing them talk so much and be so passionate about these things, I think really drew people in because they felt like, oh, I have obsessions like that. Oh, I'm weird like that. Oh, like I like to like bite my friends. Like they saw part of themselves in Dan and Phil. And that's just like really powerful. It's really powerful to like see yourself reflected in media. I think from that, they gained a very large neurodivergent and also queer audience, because I think in the same way that people were seeing them do these neurodivergent things, acting weird and being like cat boys and whatever, like people were also seeing them clearly being queer or like acting in a way that was like outside of like our heteronormative society. There were a lot of points in time where, again, especially Dan, was really like rejecting the idea of being gay because of how he wasn't ready to come out and people were trying to out him and that was not cool. But even then, he was still saying like, it's okay to be gay. There's nothing wrong with being gay. If I was gay, it would be fine. I'm just not okay. Like, FYI, I like vagina. I can't believe that's a real tweet that he tweeted. They were always so accepting of queer people, and they were always sort of by default accepting of neurodivergent people by just continuing to act weird and say like they wouldn't want to be normal, being normal is boring. I think a lot of people could see themselves in them or like find community in people that liked them, which I think is really important. But then also, because these people are neurodivergent, I'll just say we would get obsessed with them in like a really like specific and intense way, which is sort of like what I described happening to me in January 2025. And I think that experience of being that fixated on something is a really neurodivergent experience. Like, part of the draw of the internet in the 2010s when I was like getting into it was that people were carving out a space for themselves where they hadn't really had space to be themselves in their real lives. And a lot of the communities that formed online at that time were really nerdy. People were using the internet to connect with other nerds about things they were nerdy about. I want to give the example of Vlogbrothers and Nerdfighteria and Brotherhood 2.0. Remember that? People were able to see that there are people like them. Like, just because you don't know them in real life doesn't mean that they don't exist. Like, you can connect with these people through the internet. The internet is a portal for neurodivergent people. And Dan and Phil used that portal. They found each other through the internet, and people were able to see them being so successful in finding love and acceptance and just like friendship through the internet. And I think it inspired a lot of people to find that for themselves. A lot of people found that through the Dan and Phil community. And when you're a teen and you're alone and you feel like no one understands you, it can really make you feel so much to see people being understood and being accepted. And I was a person who really thought that if I could just connect with like one other person and like be really understood by them, that would just change everything about my life. And I think that might be a fantasy that a lot of like lonely neurodivergent teens have. And I think that loneliness is something that probably a lot of people in the Dan and Phil community have, or at least had, in common in the past. And hopefully through that community, we were able to feel less lonely, which is a very beautiful thing about Dan and Phil. And at the same time, it can be really jarring to be confronted with the fact that these people that you feel like you have a relationship with are not the real Dan and Phil, if that makes sense. They are like a brand, and there's like a whole team of people behind them. And I think a lot of people like do know this and are like fine with that information. But I think it can also just be like, there's kind of a lot to like reckon with, that they are a brand. What they're doing is like their job, and they're doing it at least partially for money. I definitely had a phase where I was like pissed at them for like trying to make money off of YouTube, because the way that I thought of YouTube and the way that I think of YouTube as I'm doing it is I'm just like putting this stuff out into the world. And part of what's so cool about it to me is that people can watch it for free, and I'm like able to connect with people in that way. But Dan and Phil are at a level of fame where they aren't able to connect with their audience in the same way that maybe I could as a really small YouTuber. And they are like selling merch and like doing ad sponsorships. I don't know, it's like the audience, we're like part of that, but we're not directly paying them, but our attention is paying them. There's a video that I've linked in a lot of my video descriptions before, but I'm going to link it again. It's called The Bizarre Shame of Posting on Social Media by Meredith Novico. I think that's how you pronounce her name. But she talks about this idea that in order to be famous, we think that people need to deserve that fame by being good people and being talented, when in reality, nobody deserves to be rich and famous.
One of humanity's favourite activities is to play the classic game, Do They Deserve It?
It's kind of just a byproduct of capitalism. And when I think about it like that, I'm actually really glad that Dan and Phil got the opportunity to be in that position. And obviously, this is another case of it's not good or bad, it just happened. This is the reality that we live in. Dan and Phil became extremely famous on YouTube. They are at a level of parasocial relationships. This is actually something Dan has a really interesting quote about. I'm going to try to find.
There was a point around 2011 where the relationship with my audience shifted from what felt like direct communication between me and individuals that just saw me as a comedy creator to communities of people that formed to talk about me when I wasn't there.
They're not interacting with their audience in a way that feels even remotely direct anymore. Like, they used to be like engaging in like on like Forum Spring and like Twitter, they would be like talking to their audience. They were like super chronically online, and now there's like what I see as like a healthy distance between them and their audience.
I feel like we are finally in a healthy relationship. Yeah, me and you. I have had a wild ride on the internet after the last decade, and I finally feel like we're in a position of refreshing honesty, acceptance, respect, mostly. All it took was for everyone to get 6 years older and mortified of their past, half the population realizing they were queer the whole time, and thousands of pounds of therapy. Oh well, we got here!
So something that comes up when thinking about parasocial relationships is you can go too far, and that's something that the fandom with a PH has a history of. There have been some Dan and Phil fans that have done things that have crossed a line and been a violation of Dan and Phil's privacy. And so I want to talk a bit about the line. I've been afraid of me crossing the line. And I've been afraid that the kind of obsession that I was feeling, just the extremity of how much I was thinking about them was crossing a line into creepy territory, a territory of I should be ashamed or this is a problem. And that at the end of the day is up to me to decide. There's not a moral line there that I need to heed. But at the same time, there are things that Dan and Phil have said about what to them is taking it too far. One is from basically I'm gay.
I'm somebody that wants to keep the details of my personal life private. So is Phil. I want to do certain things without an audience. I want to be spontaneous. I don't want to feel afraid to take risks. I want to enjoy totally fucking something up and not have to post a public statement about it. And if anyone thinks people really have to share these things about their life, you need to rethink your position. We can preach the message that being out is good, but aggressively speculating or trying to out someone is really bad.
And then I also have this clip from Dystopia Daily.
All right, let's make a promise. I will respect your autonomy and never beg you for anything unless I get truly desperate. And you just try to not get angry if some prophesized fan fiction doesn't come to life, or get crushingly disappointed if you ever meet me and realize I am in fact 6'3" and not 3 inches on your phone. That's what she said.
By the way, I love Dystopia Daily. My phone ran out of storage, which always happens to me. Welcome to Tuesday. I also wanted to bring attention to this clip of Phil talking about parasocial relationships. I'm realizing this video is about Dan and Phil. Definitely about Dan and Phil. But most of what Dan and Phil themselves have said about parasocial relationships has actually just been Dan. Most of what I'm referencing when I talk about them talking about this is actually Dan talking about this. But yes, here's a clip of Phil talking about this in his video where he read fan fiction that he wrote.
This is what I think. Fan fiction, as long as you're not being too creepy with it, because there's a line, Everyone knows what those lines are. Don't cross the line. I think it's a great way for people to express their creativity and also read more. I think obviously the lines are blurred a bit when you're writing about real people, and each individual might feel different levels of comfort about the fact that they're being shipped with a fictional character or another YouTuber. I think that's more of a strange grey area, but for me, if you're not being too weird, I'm alright with it.
And I find that really interesting because he says everyone knows what the line is, but he doesn't say what the line is. I would argue that everyone has their own idea of what the line is. And to me, what it seems like Dan and Phil are communicating is the line is like doing things that actually directly reach them and make their lives uncomfortable, or like things like stalking, like trying to out them. People actually have done these things. Every time I remember about that, I'm like, Jesus Christ. I think Phil here is also talking about the really weird fan fictions that people used to write about them that were like deliberately crazy messed up things, like the milk fic and the I don't remember, the hamster fic, skin fic. Like, there's all these, like, crazy fan fictions. I think he's indirectly talking about those. And I realized I didn't really mention that. But I just wanted to take a second to, like, try to, like, say, like, what is the line? Because Phil didn't say it. I feel like the reason that the idea of this line is interesting to me in the context of this video is because, like I've talked about, people get obsessed with Dan and Phil in a really, like, specific and neurodivergent way. I think that sometimes it can feel, or at least I've felt like that kind of obsession feels like it could be crossing a line, even though it's just kind of like one person on their side of the parasocial relationship. Like sometimes when I'm like, for example, I saw this video from a meet and greet where it was just like for convenience in the moment, like I feel like Dan like rested his hand on Phil's hand or something. And someone had posted like a slowed down video of that. I watched that and it made me like feel emotions. Like, oh my God, they are like so close, I guess. Literally like the meme that they will say all the time is like, oh my God, they touched! Because people freak out when they touch. I guess because it just shows maybe that they are close to each other. And I think that like a big part of why people are drawn to Dan and Phil is because it's very plain that they have a very special relationship and connection, regardless of if you want to like speculate about whether it's romantic or platonic or whatever. It is strong, unique, and like magical. And I think people can tell. I think people have been able to tell that about them for a really long time. Like I saw this Tumblr post that just says like, whether or not it's romantic or platonic, it's clear that they are just very not normal about each other in like an undeniable way. And I think that's so true. Sometimes I feel like I'm just like witnessing that and I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this. Like, what am I supposed to do knowing that they have this like special connection with each other? What do I do with this information? What am I supposed to do knowing this? Let me know if you relate to that. It's kind of like I'm having emotions, you know, like on my own in my room by myself or whatever. And I feel like I'm almost like crossing a line, like violating their boundaries by just thinking about them, which I don't think is true, because I think that what they are saying would actually be crossing the line would be if I was like on Twitter like demanding that they tell me whether or not they're dating or something, or if I was like stalking them and trying to figure out where their house is. There's stuff that's like not okay, obviously. And I think that also there's something to be said about just how at the time that they were like getting famous, like there was no precedent for online celebrities, I guess.
Back in the day, the people owned us, Phil. We were at their behest.
And people started sitting outside it straight away. Like, they watched this video, they were like, hi, Dan and Phil.
Boundaries didn't exist back then.
No.
We just had dedicated fans with Google Maps.
So Phil, what are our goals for the...
Why did we walk out the front door, film it, and put it on YouTube?
Now, you see these beautiful fountains?
These beautiful fountains.
Yes.
Where the fans were.
They were
when
just
came to
waiting.
find us.
They were waiting there.
So I guess what I'm saying is like, respecting their boundaries would just be only looking at things that they decide to share. So like, you know, videos are fair game. I saw someone on Tumblr say that they always watch the whole video looking at Dan and then watch the whole video looking at Phil. I don't do that, but like people do that. I guess the reason that this is important is because Dan and Phil and their audience have had such a long, complicated history with the line. And I think we're at a point now where we're finally able to talk about it. I recently joined a Discord, and in that Discord, we had this conversation about Dan posting basically I'm gay, and how we were also glad that he like took the hiatus. People like to joke that it was so hard going without them for like 5 years or whatever, but like I've talked to people, and this is how I feel too, where we were all so glad that Dan did step away and even like considered stepping away like for good, like never coming back. I guess because since he did decide to come back to YouTube, I feel like I'm able to trust more that he wants to be there, and that it's not like out of this sense of obligation that he talked about before interactive introverts. I feel like in that period, he really felt like he did owe something to the audience, and like that he had promised something that he was like going to like take away when he went on hiatus. And I feel like at this point, I mean, it is their career, it's their jobs, and so there's the financial aspect of them relying on this for like income and stability. But I think they're secure and like financially stable enough that they could step away at any time. And I know people would probably be upset if that happened. Like I would certainly like be sad if that happened, but it makes me feel better to operate under the assumption that creators are doing whatever they want, and then as the audience, like we're doing whatever we want. And I think it's funny for me to be talking about this. I'm in this weird like middle space where I've been like in the audience for most of my life, but then now I'm trying to like I'm on youtube.com right now yapping away. So I'm like on both sides of different parasocial relationships, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's like interesting to me and cool. Something that I'm really excited for with the tour, the Terrible Influence tour, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to see on Sunday. I don't know whether I'm going to post this before or after that happens. I think it's really cool that that show seems to be really actively about like processing that complicated relationship with their fans. Like they acknowledge what it like feels like to be on the audience's side of a parasocial relationship. They are talking about the idea of being obsessed with someone in that way. Like they're very aware of just how much space they take up in people's brains. I guess it feels good to me that they acknowledge that, and that they're thinking about that. It doesn't make it any less weird from either perspective. Like it's just a really weird situation. But this tour feels to me kind of like a step in being like, we get that this is weird. This is a bell pepper, a piece of bell pepper. We get that this is weird. It's weird for us. It's weird for you guys. It's weird between us and you guys. But we're like acknowledging that it's weird so that we can then accept the situation that we're in, instead of trying to make it something that it's not, or feel conflicted internally or bad about this situation. Like instead we're just like, yes, this is weird. And I think that is what I'm trying to do in this video as well. There's this clip on the Shut Up I'm Talking podcast. They're talking about what it was like coming up on YouTube with each other in the picture. And here's what they say.
I think that it was good having another person to kind of come up on YouTube with, to just give you perspective that, yes, this is weird.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people that just sit in their bedroom creating content for 5 years, suddenly they've got 1 million followers, they just turn into like weird goblins because they've got no one to ground them and be like, is my life weird now? Is this strange? Do we need to talk about it? Whereas me and Phil could look at each other every day and be like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Isn't this crazy?
Yeah.
I used to be a law student and now I'm in the BBC building pretending that I'm a radio DJ.
It seems like that was really important for them. I've been sort of like a lone like lurker online. Recently, I like made a Tumblr and I joined like some Discords. And I'm starting to like actually interact with other people who have the same interests as me, like through the internet. And it just feels so good to like know that other people are seeing the same things that you're seeing and thinking about the same things you're thinking about and having feelings about those things as well. Like that does so much. So like this video partially is literally just me looking at you guys and being like, this is weird, right? Like this is weird. we're all seeing this, we're all feeling these things, like it's weird, right? Anyone that knows me in real life knows that I will not shut up about community. What I mean in this context is relating to people and feeling understood. I feel like that's so much of what Dan and Phil is about for a lot of people, or at least for me. Seeing them understand each other and accept each other makes me feel like I could be accepted and understood, despite my like fears of being a freak or being too like obsessive or being too weird or into like cringe things. Something that Dan and Phil talk about, especially when like promoting their tour mostly, is how so many people have found community through them and how that is something that makes them feel really good. And I'm like starting to experience that, or like allow myself to experience that for the first time. That's like what they have given to queer neurodivergent people. Like, I'm trans and autistic. I was kind of a lonely kid growing up. I had friends. I had really good friends, actually. But I still felt alienated. Like, there's something inherently like different about me that could never be understood. And I think that Dan and Phil really spoke to people who felt like that. There's something so special about them just putting themselves out there online and being themselves and being really freaking weird and like cringe and letting people see them be themselves and see them be accepted for being themselves by each other and see them like have this connection that seems so magical. I think it gave a lot of lonely, maybe depressed, neurodivergent, queer young people hope and a sense that things could work out for them or that they could find community. It gave a lot of people community, often in a way that they've never experienced before. And I want to talk about a little bit of nuance within that, because I think there is an element of fantasy when it comes to YouTube and parasocial relationships. I guess I had this like idea that someone could just drop out of the sky and like make my life better and make me feel like everything is actually fine, because I was just like finally understood by like one person. In my head, that would be like a romantic relationship. And that's something that I don't feel anymore for the most part. But like as like a kid and like a teenager, I definitely had this kind of fantasy that like if I just met the right person, like everything would be okay. And I think there's a way that you could even interpret like what Dan said in Basically I'm Gay as meaning that that did happen to him, where he says this.
It's so lucky to just find someone you can be that compatible with, and especially to anyone that has experienced the kind of self-hatred that I've dealt with, one person accepting you can make all the difference.
I think it's possible people could have heard him say that and thought that when Phil came into his life, like everything kind of fell into place and was okay, because that's something that I really wished would happen to me. But that isn't what happened. That's a fantasy. Unfortunately, meeting the right person isn't gonna just make everything okay. And like, I think that's pretty clear from what Dana said. Like, I'm not saying that they're not soulmates. I think they are. What I am saying is that I think I had this idea or fantasy at one point that once Phil accepted Dan for who he was and like broke down his walls, everything was kind of okay. But that's not true. Like, they were still coming up on YouTube trying to figure out how to be celebrities, how to be in the public eye, how to like not work themselves to death. Like, they were such workaholics in like the 2010s. And I think that they were both, or at least Dan, had this pressure on him to have a successful career. And he's talked a lot about how he never really checked in with himself. He was just going for years and had to stop and had to decide that he wanted to try to get to a better place with his mental health. And that's like the point when he wrote his book and went on his solo tour. And I guess that quote is so interesting to me, where he says all it takes is one person, because I think that one person can change so much about your life and how you see yourself. But I also think that person can be you. And sometimes that person has to be you. Sometimes you have to make a choice to change your own life, and no one is going to be able to do that for you. Like, even if you have the most perfect relationship, you still are going to need to want to get better on your own in order for it to actually happen. Someone else can't fix you. This is something that I have had to like realize or like had to learn in my own life. And I think that there's still definitely like, when I think about Dan and Phil, I just can't believe that really happened in the same world that I live in. Like, like that they met and were so lucky and compatible. What is it that he said? It's so lucky to find someone that you can just be that compatible with. It's so lucky. They were so lucky to find each other, and not everyone is gonna find that. And honestly, like in my life, when I really think about it, I don't want just one person that I'm that compatible with. Like, I want that kind of compatibility with like all my friends. Maybe not that exact, like not one kind of compatibility in every relationship, but like, I don't think one person could do it for me. Like, they are unique in that way. I still feel like if I could be them, I would. If I could just like be fulfilled from like one person, I would, but I don't think that's possible for me, and I don't even know if it's possible for them. I think a lot of people have an idea of them, like, because they talk so much about being so introverted and never leaving the house and relying on each other for all these things. I think that people have this idea that they are all they need, and I don't know if that's true. I think that is kind of a fantasy that people have, that I sometimes have. I just wanted to talk about the idea of fantasy when it comes to YouTubers and parasocial relationships. And another aspect of this is that part of the appeal for YouTubers is that they are like a real person. You're not just watching a film that they made or looking at like someone's painting or something. Like, they are the content, which is really unique about YouTube and really fascinating to me. But I think it can lead to this, again, like fantasy that like what you're seeing is really them or really like their real life. And I think that people often are trying to show their real personality on YouTube. At least for me, when I first started watching YouTube when I was like a teenager, there was this idea that they're alone and I'm alone and we're connecting through the internet. And there's something special about that. But when it comes to like YouTubers that are as big as Dan and Phil are, it's not just them and us. There are editors, there's like a team of like managers, there's like tour managers, there's merch, there's all this stuff going on because they're basically like a brand, which is like kind of hard to wrap my head around. Because YouTube, one of the things that's special about it to me is watching people be candid and real. So that's another element of the fantasy that I wanted to touch on. I don't know, I guess I think it's important to acknowledge that that can play into people's view of Dan and Phil. Like, because we only see what they show us, our minds fill in all of these other details. And like, this is a very normal part of like celebrity culture and like speculating about people's lives, but it's also just, once again, it's weird. It's weird, and I don't know what to say about it. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, the only title that makes sense for this section to me is Beacon of Hope. And I just want to talk about how important it is to see yourself reflected in media and to see people living, I guess, authentically and like being themselves and being accepted. And I've said a lot about this already in this video. I think I don't have that much more to add, but I just wanted to end, I guess, on this note that because of the internet and because of what they've chosen to share with the internet, people are able to expand their views of themselves because of what Dan and Phil have been able to demonstrate and share, which I think is really powerful. One thing that's coming to mind is Dan calling himself a formless blob in terms of gender.
Icons of masculinity aren't really a big part of my life. Might as well call me a fucking formless blob. That sounds more relatable. Shout out to all my formless blobs out there. Rise up.
And just casually being non-binary. This video was supposed to be about Dan and Phil, but I just keep talking about Dan, which is so funny because I actually relate more to Phil. That's probably why I'm talking about Dan so much. But another thing is like Sister Daniel.
Sister Daniel.
Hello, boys.
Sister Daniel is like Dan's drag persona, but she's not like a normal drag persona because he doesn't wear like a breastplate or like a full face of makeup. So it's a lot more casual than drag typically feels. And I'm like a casual, comfy person, and I love that he's providing an example of how to like casually play around with gender. I think that's so awesome. I also love seeing Dan and Phil talk about hyperfixation in like a really casual way, like it's just like a normal thing, which is true. It is a normal thing, but I don't see people talking about it. Like they've mentioned a few times that Dan has like a roller coaster hyperfixation, or he also is like really into Formula One and just like being obsessed with these things in like a really like nerdy way or like neurodivergent way. Phil having a similar obsession with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and both of them being really into Final Fantasy and Muse. It's just cool to see them be really passionate about these things in like a not casual way. Like they're really into Final Fantasy. They have a framed picture of themselves as Catboys in Final Fantasy. And I just love being able to like see that as an example, I guess, of like this is a way that a person can be. This is a way that you're allowed to be, and you can be accepted and loved for it, not like despite it, but like because it's part of you. I think that's really powerful for people to see. And then also just seeing them show that they care for each other in a way that is really, I guess, authentic and like real, like it's not performative, but it just comes through anyway. They're always like making fun of each other and goofing around, and that is a type of dynamic that is just really fun to see and also really real. Like a lot of close friends are like really jokey with each other and really silly and will make fun of each other in like a really casual way. And I love to see that. I also have this example written down from what Dan and Phil text each other, where Dan was going to the hospital because his eyes just randomly started hurting, and Phil texted him, "Very painful."
I did not want to make a scene socially. And you know when they're like, where do you describe the pain? Phil was like, you have to tell them you're in an extreme amount of pain. Because I would have been like, I'm fine.
Whenever Dan talks to a doctor, he's like, yeah, it's not that bad.
Is this an emergency? I mean, both of my arms fell off, but
It's
I'll be
alright.
okay.
It did a lot for me to just see Phil reminding Dan that he needs to advocate for himself in a medical setting and be honest about how much pain he's really in so that he receives the medical care that he needs. That's another like way that they're like providing an example for people by really just like being themselves and sharing their lives with the internet, like sharing what they're comfortable with sharing with the internet. I think that that can give people hope, because like I think before, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't around before the internet really, but like I think that because of the internet, we're able to see people that we can relate to and see ourselves in, and see those people grow and change, especially with people like Dan and Phil who have been on the internet for so long. They've been here for 15 years. They've changed so much in that time period. That's like one of my favorite things about YouTube, just following people as they go through their life. I love that shit. I love a long-term project that you can't even conceptualize where it's going when it starts. I think YouTube is so cool for that reason. But I think a lot of people are able to find hope and community and all this important stuff through Dan and Phil. And I think that's really important and awesome and makes me really happy. And I think that that's almost it. I just wanted to go through all of that, say what I've been thinking about it. I would love to know what you guys think about it. There's a lot to unpack here, a lot to think about, and everything is way more complicated than it would be convenient for it to be. But here we are. This is the world that we live in. How are you guys coping with Dan and Phil existing? Let me know in the comments. I just wanted to end with this quote that's also from Basically I'm Gay. A lot of amazing quotes in that video. Amazing video. Again, if you haven't seen it, I really recommend watching Basically I'm Gay by Daniel Howell. He says in that video,
With the lives that we have, we can try anything we've dreamed of.
I just really want to like call attention to that quote specifically because he's serious. Like that's true. With the lives that we have, and especially with the tools that the internet gives us, we can try anything we've dreamed of. That includes finding a connection like Dan and Phil's. That includes finding community through the internet. That includes making art of your own. That includes starting a freaking YouTube channel. That includes learning how to heal from trauma so that you can have the kind of relationship that you want. Like, and it includes shit like climbing a freaking mountain, like doing literally whatever. With the lives that we have, we can try anything we've dreamed of. So I'm just gonna leave it there. This has been a video that's been like in the works for a really long time for me. So if you made it this far, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.